Insisting it has no intention of scrapping the triple lock promise, which guarantees the state pension will increase by at least 2.5% per year. Downing Street made the commitment in the face of a call from the former pensions minister, Baroness Altmann, who's warning the policy could prove prohibitively expensive.
You know, if we, for example, go into a period of deflation where prices start falling, which Japan has had for many, many years, then this 2.5% is incredibly generous, but more importantly also will take a lot of our national resources away from other things. And the forecasts for the costing of the triple lock are that it would cost billions of pounds extra in the long term. And in fact, if we went into a deflationary period, the government actually estimated that it could actually double the cost of the state pension.
Well, Steve Webb was the Liberal Democrat pensions minister who introduced the triple lock. Speaking earlier on this programme, he defended the policy, dismissing claims that the country's pensioners are being feather-bedded at the expense of the younger generations.
Many people of working age, though slightly older, have benefited hugely from low mortgage rates, whereas the pensioner population has suffered considerably from low savings rates. So it's not all about, everything's great if you're elderly. It's still the case in Britain today that half of pensioners are too poor even to afford to pay income tax. They're below that level. So it's just a myth that, we have this vast elderly generation who are all living the life of Riley.
Well, joining us now to discuss the issue is David Finch, who's a senior policy analyst with the Resolution Foundation, and Tom Berney, who's the chair of the Scottish Older People's Assembly. Good morning to both of you. David Finch, if I could first of all ask you, what do you make of what Ros Altmann is saying there? Is she right in her assessment that the triple lock guarantee is or will be unaffordable?
Well, I think if you look at the kind of triple lock in itself, the important thing there really is that you're restoring the earnings link back to state pensions, and that means that over time it's going to help state pensions keep their generosity in level with the incomes of working age people, and that in itself is adding a significant cost onto the actual state pension bill. But I think it's important that pensions, the income of pensioners is able to track the incomes of people who are in work over a long period of time, and I think the triple lock is really adding on an extra cost to that.
That's the 2.5% bit then.
That and the inflation side of it as well. So both those things are really adding a cost over the long time. So when we're talking over a kind of 40-year period, and that does add significant pressure onto what is already expected to be big pressures from an ageing population over time.
Tom Berney, presumably you would say that the triple lock needs to remain in place, I presume.
Yes, absolutely, and I always find it a bit ironic when Baroness Altmann or someone else in the House of Lords says that pensions are too high. Baroness Altmann gets £300 a day just for turning up at the House of Lords. Now that's twice the weekly pension. One day she picks up £300, a pensioner has to work all week, they live all week on that. But I think too that what I would like to talk about is the comparisons with maybe other countries. And according to the House of Commons' own papers, Britain is one of the lowest pensions in Europe. In fact, in 2011, we ranked 26th out of 27 countries in Europe in terms of state pension. Now, every comparison we've seen in the British pension is far too low. Now, the triple lock, since 2010, the government assessed that the adequacy of the pension was something like 63%, so it was well below being adequate. But since then, it's increased to about 67%. So what we have seen is the triple lock has at least improved the standing of the pension in terms of cost of living and so on. But we're still a long way behind having a decent pension, state pension. We have over 140,000 people in Scotland, pensioners, living in poverty.
But Tom, would it not be fairer if you got rid of the 2.5% bit, which guarantees pensions will increase by 2.5%, but peg them to average earnings, so everybody's wages or income would rise by the same amount, and pensioners wouldn't be in a position where their income might rise significantly higher than other parts of society?
Well, one of the things that always worries me is that it's tempting to make that kind of comparison, but what we do is we're comparing low-paid people with low-earning pensioners. Now, why don't we look at other people, for example? What we're seeing in this country is a massive difference between ordinary people and the very rich. For example, when Margaret Thatcher was in office, the lowest 10% of earners, the gap between them and the top 1% was £25,000. Since then, it has increased to £80,000. So we have a massive gap between the ordinary 10% of ordinary people and the best paid. Now, if we're looking at comparisons, I would look at comparison between the wealthy in Britain and pensioners rather than other low paid
Except
people.
we are talking about the triple lock in this particular instance, and I'm sure that's a kind of conversation that we will have another time. But David Finch, Tom Berney has a point there saying that maybe the focus shouldn't be on how much pensioners are earning, but is it right, do you think, to guarantee an income to pensioners, and that is what the triple lock does?
Well, I think if we look at kind of what the triple lock has actually done, it has played an important role in helping to protect kind of pensioners' living standards and keep pensioner poverty low, where we had seen successive governments do quite a lot to help push down the levels of pensioner poverty. But at the same time, as we're seeing this kind of increase in pensioner benefits, so they'll have risen by around 10% by the end of this Parliament since the downturn, we'll have seen the support that families with children, and these are the poorer families with children, that will fall by around 15% over the same period. So I think, for me, the real comparison here, and I think it's right, we should be thinking about society across the board, but we're actually seeing within the benefit system itself this kind of transfer between generations, where the old, effectively, billions are being paid towards the older pensioners, and we're seeing cuts to support for younger pensioners. And I think, so it's not really, I think we're arguing that you should see these big cuts to pensioner benefits, but I think better targeting of support, and the fact that it just becomes very hard to have these additional protections in place for pensioners when you're seeing such large cuts in support for working age families, particularly those with children.
Should it be better targeted then, Tom Berney? Because as David Finch says there, the younger are getting poorer while the older are getting richer. I know that's not across the board, but there will be some pensioners who are benefiting. Should the benefits be targeted in a better way?
Well, I have every sympathy for younger people today, because what we have been seeing is a drastic cut in the living standards of many younger people. But that's not because of pensions, that's because of the changes in the way society is organised. We have.
But some of the benefits have been taken from the younger people, and older people are still maintaining their level of benefits. Though.
Yes, but what you should be asking is, why is it that the younger people need benefits? One of the reasons is that we have 800,000 people in Britain working in 0 hours contracts. So if we're looking at that, we're looking at the taxpayer then having to subsidise poor employers. Now, if the employers were paying proper wages in the first place, we wouldn't be having to use that. So I would be looking. Now, when I talked about the growth in the gap between rich and poor getting wider, that coincides entirely with the decline in trade union membership, for example. So if we had workers working for decent employers, properly represented and able to negotiate better terms, large part of that need for benefits would fall.
Yeah, David Finch, do you think sort of opening up the discussion about the triple lock will trigger a sort of wider discussion about benefits and the types of issues that Tom Berney was talking about there?
Well, I mean, hopefully we will see greater discussion of these issues around the types of support and incomes that people have across generations. We've actually just launched a kind of 18-month commission to look into intergenerational fairness. And I mean, all of these issues do come into that. And I think kind of playing an important role here is that what we've seen is this kind of 7-year squeeze on earnings for people since the downturn on the working age side. And clearly things like the national living wage coming in start to help redress some of these the issues for people on low pay. But the idea that at the same time you start to cut support for those families who are already in work, while seeing kind of large protections in place on the pensioner side, I think it just comes back to a basic unfairness. And you can look more widely at the tax system as well, where we can see the kind of cuts to income tax we've seen. They're benefiting older people more than younger people. By older, I mean, and people kind of in their 50s up, but also those richer pensioners. So again, you're seeing kind of tax cut for richer pensioners, while seeing cuts to in-work support for working age families with children. A
last word, Tom Berney.
Well, I feel that the tendency is to get into a race to the bottom by comparing the poor with the very poor, rather than looking. I'm in favour of redistributing cash, both welfare cash and wages, but what we should be doing is redistributing from people who have the cash rather than from the low paid. Can I give you one extreme example?
Yeah, briefly.
One extreme example was Simon Peckham, who's the highest earning chief executive in Britain. He earns, it takes him 48 minutes to earn a year's minimum wage. Now, that means he gets 2,238 times the minimum wage. Now, when we're in a country, and he's an extreme example, but there's a lot of that. The gap between rich and poor is getting wider and wider. And it seems to me what we should be addressing is that, both by taxation and by employment, to make sure that the gap between rich and poor improves. If we do that, people will pay more taxes. They'll then have more coming in, but then able to pay everybody decent welfare benefits.
Thank you for coming in this morning, Tom Berney. There we also heard from David Finch. It's coming up to 19 minutes past 8.